understanding by design, not by good fortune, not by dumb luck, not by virtue of just having a few smart and articulate kids, but understanding by design. What can we do to make it more likely, given the kids we have?
When I came to this district, we began to look very carefully at what we taught, how we taught, and what we wanted the students to come away with in terms of ideas and connections to real life. With that in mind, we formed a committee and began to explore ideas and really good philosophies out there about teaching and education. Understanding by design rose to the top.
There are some design strategies, some design tools that can help us more likely reach our goals regardless of who we are and who our students are. And those tools flow from a basic design strategy that we call backward design. Backward design from your goals. Not backward design from content, but backward design from the effective use and meaning making with content, because that's the goal. The goal is not to get good at school. The goal is not to just cover stuff and see if kids got what you covered. The goal is content that they can use, so design backward from it. And all the tools, the template, all the stuff comes back to that. So if you feel yourself getting overwhelmed with the particulars, just backward design from your goals.
Heard the term before, so I didn't know what was going to be expected to develop the whole thing. But in essence, it's really the backwards design where you start at what do you want those kids to know at the end of the project, and you're designing that unit. I think as part of an elementary school teacher, we inherently do that. We start with the big idea, and we slowly fine-tune it and rethink it and revisit it constantly. So I think it's just part of what we do.
I think what helped us a lot along the way was really having that essential question to go back to. I know several times we started coming up with some great ideas that would be super to add.
Yeah.
And when we sat down and started talking about it in meeting, we said, wait a minute. This doesn't go back.
The question.
It's not backing up our essential question. This isn't what we're trying to get the kids, to learn. So I think having that to rely on really helped us a lot.
It helped us weed out all that stuff.
It kept us focused.
One of the great things in a school that follows the UbD protocols is that when you go into classrooms and you walk up to a student and say, do you know why you're doing this? And do you know what you're doing? In the past, it would be more because the teacher told me or, but now some of the students understand that, we're working on this because it relates to what the teacher wants us to do at the end of the unit. So in a social studies class, if they're working on geography in a lesson, and if I ask a student, why are you doing this particular activity? They'll say, well, it ties into that big idea the teacher has that where one lives affects how one lives.
To discuss how what we did today ties into these essential questions. How does climate impact the lives of people in Europe? What causes the wide variety of climates?
The elevation and the elevation
Europe
and latitude.
has a lot of mountains, right?
Yeah, because it's very mountainous and the elevation. Cody, do you have a say in this?
Well, if the elevation was high, you wouldn't see people in shorts and t-shirts up there.
So it affects how people dress and live. Yeah.
And
What kind of foods they eat.
I started to really think about, before I planned a lesson, what do I want the kids to know? What do I think is important? Which I had never really done before, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but I never had. And so I started saying, okay, well, I want every student to understand these particular things, but not only do I want them to understand these particular things, I want them to understand why it should be important to them. And since then, I've taken several courses. I've developed many UbDs. I don't always do a full understanding by design unit, but I also always incorporate the essential questions into my lessons because it helps focus me, and it helps me not get off track, and it helps the students understand what's important for them to know and why it's important for them to know it.
And it's really important to not see UbD as a thing, as a program, as a script. It's a set of tools for being a better designer. Use the tools that work. Don't use the ones that don't seem useful or helpful to you. It's a way of thinking along with a set of tools. And that way of thinking is really think hard about what your long-term goals demand of short-term teaching, learning, and assessing. So that's what it is. It's a way of being more disciplined, more focused, more mindful of priorities.
Things that we saw when teachers modified their units based on the UbD protocols is that students were more engaged in the lessons in that they were more active. There was less teacher direction and more student-to-student conversations.
One of the big changes that I have seen in student learning since we've started to implement UbD is their thinking. We're challenging their thinking with the essential questions. I love when we give an essential question, discussion begins, and you see more questions and ideas coming through to the students. And we have an opportunity then to challenge their thinking with more questions from it.
UbD has been in the district and been more part of the classroom experience. What I'm noticing is we've made a shift from teacher-directed to more student-centered instruction. I've also seen the kind of work that teachers and students are engaged with is much more meaningful. So you have meaningful activities that are minds-on and as well as hands-on.
Our results have been fantastic. Students' results on standardized tests have been great. We really have the staff understanding that you can teach for big ideas and concepts without sacrificing test scores. And when teachers see that, it makes them feel that they're on the right track. Kids also don't have their eyes glazed over. You know, kids in classes are engaged. They're actively making meaning, and we've seen their work improve.
Well, I did student teaching before, and it was in a very traditional setting and in a high school setting, and I think kids came in and they didn't realize what they were doing or why they were doing it. It was just a random list of activities, and you kind of went from one day to the next, and they just had to learn it because they had to learn it, and it was going to be on a test, and they got a grade for it. Whereas with UbD, they come in and they know exactly why they're learning it, and it puts the learning on them. And makes them makes a learner active classroom and less on the teacher. So it gives kids more independence, more autonomy than they would in a traditional classroom.
Just speak when we want to speak, and I think it makes you more engaged because you listen for something to respond to, and you try to understand what other people are saying. So it just makes you more creative, and it's not so like this, as much as it is like it's more liberal, and you can actually think instead of just a question-answer format.
You also learn from everyone in the discussion. You know, someone else might have a totally different opinion than you do, and it could open up a whole new view on the story for you. So it really helps when you have a bunch of people saying their views.
Really, the greatest challenge is to avoid self-deception. Oh, I've always done it this way. I'm comfortable doing it that way. Yeah, but wait a minute. Your goals call for transfer and practice and feedback, but your learning plan doesn't mesh with that. So really just be disciplined about saying, if those are my goals, what follows for instruction? That's the essence of stage 3.
Made up by our 3 stores, but we didn't want to put it there because it wasn't on like any major roads, and it would be more difficult to like transport our goods from the headquarters. So then we looked at our Circumcenter, which was Chelmsford, and that's on Route 495, which would be a great place to put a headquarters, and we could deliver the goods really easily.
Their algebraic work to support their project. They have their poster board to demonstrate their findings, and then they also construct a summary paper which ties everything together and explains where they pick their headquarters to be and why. And they explain if they didn't choose their Circumcenter, they explain why they didn't. If they chose their centroid, they explain why they did. So they explain why or why not for both of them, and also tie in the major roads.
It should be.
I see, rather than just sitting back and listening to explanations, they're thinking about what these things actually mean, and they're asking great questions. They're asking the true questions that show that they're really thinking about and understanding the true meaning of these concepts and really tying everything together and understanding, not just replicating what I did on the board or replicating a homework problem that they did. They're really showing that they understand more meaning to why we are learning these two concepts and how they can be applied to a real world application.
Understanding by design is a response, a natural response to a problem that you can identify with. So if you can identify with the problem that sometimes your lessons are too activity-driven or content coverage-driven, and that kids aren't as engaged as they might be, and you're pretty sure that it's something that you can control and it's not just the kids, then UbD makes sense. If you don't resonate with the problems of learning for understanding, if you don't have problems with kids who can't transfer learning, then UbD is not for you. I mean, it's meant to be a response to a need that you can recognize.
We have to wrestle with the material in order to get it ourselves, because if the teacher were to give it to us, then we would probably, we'd understand that information, but we couldn't think even further into it.
We do an ancient leader election now where students look at the leaders that they studied and in light of today's current issues have a whole election cycle of who would make the best leader today based on their qualities that they were historically. Prior to that, we tended to teach the leaders just in the time and place and a certain amount of facts about them. There was no transfer of their understanding to them.
We find it helpful, and many teachers have told us that this was really helpful to them, to take all of what we've said about learning for understanding and realize that therefore we have 3 different teaching goals. There's meaning making and transfer. We said those are the twin elements of learning for understanding. The third element is what we're all familiar with, acquisition of knowledge and skill. So acquisition, meaning making, and transfer. Now it's interesting to just look at your typical lesson plan and code it. What was the purpose of this activity? Was it acquisition, student meaning making, or practice or feedback related to transfer attempts? And what you'll find, if you're like most people, is that there's lots and lots of acquisition activities, but very few meaning-making and transfer-related activities. And yet, you have meaning-making and transfer-related goals. So it's a really good way to look at your planning and say, am I doing justice to my goals?
And I like it because it kind of goes back to what a coach does when you have a football game or a soccer game. The kids get out and they go to the event and perform, and you actually, they videotape it, and then they come back in and they look at what the kids did and point out weaknesses, they drill them on it, and then they improve in the next game. So then I get to play the role as a coach. The kids do their task, and I give them a rubrics to tell them what I expect of them. And then by peer assessing and feedback, this tells them, did you hit the mark? Or is there something you need to improve? So I'm kind of playing the role as a coach, teacher, and helping them to get their project online for the final product.
The enthusiasm that just bubbles over when kids see that you value their ideas enough, that you aren't just lecturing them. And I think that it's also humbling for teachers because you're suddenly asked to see that you maybe aren't needed as much as you think you are. But I think that's also, in the end, really empowering because you see that your role isn't, I'm going to fill you with knowledge today about Romeo and Juliet. It's more, let's discover this together and let's see what we find. I may know a little bit more about you, so I may be able to help guide you along the way with some nicely placed questions. But, maybe you'll help me understand something I wasn't quite seeing. And when kids recognize that you intellectually treat them in that kind of equal way, I think that it really sucks them in, and they want to be a part of it.
It showed me how the real world works, and I'm glad it's in 8th grade instead of as soon as I take my first job when I'm 20.